Over the past few decades, hundreds of US service members have reported encounters with unexplained phenomena at bases across the United States. Many of these accounts involve figures tied to Native American folklore, especially skinwalkers, beings mentioned for centuries in Navajo tradition. These events didn't happen in war zones, but on home soil, Arizona, Camp Pendleton, Quantico, among others. Witness testimonies include voices mimicking comrades, animals with human-like behavior, and presences that defy logic. While there are no official confirmations, these reports are consistent across different states, units, and time periods. One striking coincidence is the proximity of these bases to sacred Native American lands. In this video, you'll hear a series of real accounts from American service members who faced the unexplained, and the questions that arise when tradition, spirituality, and technology intersect. Long before planes flew over the Pacific or soldiers landed on Normandy beaches, there was a group of men whose language would become one of the Allies' greatest weapons. These were the Navajo, an ancient indigenous people from the deserts of the American Southwest. During World War II, these men were recruited by the US Army as code talkers, using their almost impossible to decipher language to transmit coded messages between battalions. Their contribution was essential to the success of campaigns in the Pacific, especially against the Japanese. However, this story is only one side of the Navajo tradition. There's another side, much older, much darker, and less recognized by history books. A side that whispers on the desert winds and echoes on cold nights. This is where we find the skinwalkers, figures feared even by the bravest among the Navajo people. The word skinwalker is a rough translation of the Navajo term Yinaldlushi, which means with him who walks on all fours. But this literal meaning hides something far more disturbing. In tradition, a skinwalker was originally a medicine man, a respected healer, who broke the sacred balance by seeking power through dark means. These individuals, according to belief, abandoned the spiritual paths of healing to practice witchcraft, sacrificing their own family members to gain supernatural abilities. The result? The ability to transform into any animal they wished: wolves, owls, coyotes, bears, and even manipulate the human mind. These aren't just distant myths. For the Navajo, skinwalkers are real, dangerous, and continue to haunt certain regions to this day. According to oral tradition, skinwalkers don't just shapeshift, they also walk between worlds. They are beings that inhabit the borders between the physical and the spiritual, capable of crossing great distances in seconds or invading the dreams and thoughts of their victims. Some accounts describe them watching from afar, with eyes that glow in the dark, while others say they take on human forms to infiltrate communities disguised as ordinary people. Their presence is always accompanied by bad omens: sickness, disappearances, sudden animal deaths, ruined crops. And while the stories vary, one thing remains constant: the silent, almost reverent fear that even the oldest members of the tribe feel when mentioning them. Among the elders of the Navajo Nation, talking about skinwalkers is taboo. Not out of cheap superstition, but because it's believed that just mentioning these creatures is enough to attract their attention. Many avoid even telling stories about them, preferring silence over the possibility of becoming a target. According to belief, skinwalkers are immortal unless they are killed in their animal form, an almost impossible task as they are agile, intelligent, and above all, manipulative. Those who have tried to confront them report episodes of hallucinations, voices calling in the dark, and intense sensations of being pursued, even when completely alone. For most, the only defense is avoidance and respect for the lands where these entities supposedly dwell. Interestingly, skinwalkers seem to be tied to the territory itself. Many sightings occur in isolated desert regions, near ancient ruins or abandoned ceremonial sites. Some theorists believe these beings are distorted guardians of these places, spiritual manifestations born from interrupted rituals or ancestral curses. Others see them as the result of collective trauma, reflections of the suffering and violence inflicted on the Navajo people during centuries of colonization, wars, and forced displacements. Pain, they say, shapes entities. And skinwalkers would be the spiritual echo of this accumulated pain, a supernatural response to suffering impossible to forget. The most disturbing thing, however, is how the figure of the skinwalker seems to survive modernity. Even with advances in technology, increased surveillance and military presence on indigenous lands, reports of these creatures continue to emerge. Witnesses claim to have seen animals acting strangely, as if intentionally observing humans. There are stories of creatures crossing 10-foot fences without any effort, of human voices coming from animal bodies, of eyes that glow in the dark and vanish when confronted with light. And it's not just tribal members who report this. Hunters, ranchers, and even military personnel tell similar experiences. In the Navajo spiritual view, the world is formed by balance, light and darkness, healing and destruction. Skinwalkers represent the breaking of this balance. They are living symbols of what happens when someone chooses personal power over collective harmony. Therefore, their stories serve as both a warning and a reminder. A warning to those who seek power at any cost. A reminder that every gift has its price, and that the connection to the spiritual world is not a game, but a responsibility that cannot be betrayed without serious consequences. The origin of these entities is deeply linked to spiritual ceremonies that went out of control. Some say that the first skinwalkers were born from a protection ritual that was corrupted by hatred and envy. A shaman, feeling wronged, supposedly inverted sacred symbols and channeled his knowledge for evil. The ritual gave him the ability to shapeshift, but condemned him to live on the fringes, hunted by other shamans and avoided by his own tribe. From him, others followed the same path, forming an invisible lineage of beings who wander through time and space, always lurking, always hungry. Over the decades, these stories have been shaped, taking on new forms as they cross generations and borders. Ancient tales whispered around campfires became posts on obscure internet forums, accounts in homemade videos of alleged nocturnal encounters, and even cases recorded by military personnel in training zones. This modernization of the myth has only increased the fascination and the fear surrounding the skinwalker. After all, the more they are talked about, the more real they seem to become. And if there's one thing Navajo tradition teaches, it's that thought is a form of invocation. We started this story with heroes, the Navajo who saved lives with their language during the war. And now we end it with legends, the skinwalkers who defy logic, faith, and science. This duality defines the Navajo people, guardians of knowledge, both of light and of darkness. And perhaps, by listening to these stories with respect and attention, we can learn more about the invisible boundaries that surround our world. Because in the end, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, there's something deeply human in the fear of the unknown. And it is in that unknown that the skinwalkers continue to lurk. It was the early 1900s in a dry, forgotten part of New Mexico. The land stretched out quietly, and the wind carried stories no one dared to tell. A young Navajo man named Thomas Beay worked as a ranch hand near the Arizona border. He knew the animals, the sounds of the night, and nature's routines well. Nothing there surprised him, until that cold morning when everything changed. He'd gone out before dawn to check on some strange activity in the corrals. The dogs were barking wildly, and one of them was hiding, shaking. That's when he saw a figure in the distance. It looked like a large coyote, but its eyes, they seemed human. Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle, rested it on the fence, and aimed. The shot echoed through the dry valley like thunder, startling the horses in the stables and making the dogs back away. The creature fell, but what he found when he got closer left him frozen. The form in front of him was impossible to explain. A thin body covered in sparse, uneven fur, front paws that looked like deformed hands, and a face that was half human. The eyes, though lifeless, still held an expression of conscious agony. Not knowing what to do, Thomas panicked. He dragged the body to a crack in the ground, hiding it under rocks and dry branches. He didn't tell anyone right away, but the feeling of being watched never left him. That same night he had nightmares. He dreamed of glowing eyes outside his window, of howls turning into human laughter, and of his own voice screaming for help. In the following days, the animals started getting sick. A cow was found with a twisted neck, and chickens mysteriously disappeared without a trace of blood. Thomas began hearing light footsteps around the house, even when no one else was there. Shadows seemed to move strangely, and the dogs, usually alert, refused to go outside after sunset. Desperate, he told his family everything. That's when fear turned into real terror. Thomas's father, an old man who knew the ancient Navajo traditions, was silent for a long time after hearing the story. Then, in a low voice, he simply said, "You've messed with something you don't understand." The family then performed a protection ritual, scattering sacred herbs and ashes around the house. But the patriarch was direct. Thomas couldn't stay there anymore. The ranch was near an area considered cursed, where, according to the elders, dark spirits had roamed since before the white settlers arrived. He had to leave immediately, before whatever was lurking decided to take more than just the animals. Without arguing, Thomas left that same week. He went to live with relatives in another part of the state, vowing never to return to that land. Even from a distance, the nightmares continued for a while. He never revealed the exact location of the body, or went back to check if it was still there. Curiously, shortly after he left, the ranch was sold. The new family who took over the place abandoned the property less than a year later, claiming strange occurrences and things they couldn't explain. The land remained empty for decades, eventually overgrown with bushes, ruins, and stories told only in whispers. What Thomas saw that morning is still debated among the few who know the story. Some say he killed a skinwalker. Others claim the being was a cursed shaman, trapped between the world of men and animals. Some believe he didn't kill the creature. He just freed it from a physical form, allowing its spirit to return stronger and more vengeful. Either way, the incident deeply affected Thomas's life. He started wearing protection necklaces, avoided going out at night, and never allowed anyone to talk about the past in his presence. His story, told only to a few friends, was passed down almost like a warning. Among the more superstitious in the Navajo community, it's said that killing a skinwalker isn't the end. It's the beginning of a spiritual bond. Once you cross paths with one, your soul is watched closely. The dead one, even if seemingly destroyed, can return in another form. Some accounts speak of ravens following people for days, of coyotes appearing at the same times in different cities, of familiar voices coming from the wilderness. For these people, Thomas didn't just kill a creature. He sealed a pact of silent pursuit that would last his entire life, and perhaps even beyond it. In unofficial records, there are similar reports of humanoid figures seen on isolated ranches, especially in areas of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. The details vary, but the pattern is always the same: eyes with abnormal intelligence, unnatural movements, and an overwhelming sense of malevolent presence. Coincidence or not, many of these sightings occur near lands considered sacred or cursed by native tribes. And although there's no concrete proof, the elders say, when the land is restless, it reveals its secrets to those who dare to violate its boundaries. Thomas may have been just one among many, but he had the courage to tell his story. The figure of the skinwalker is haunting not just because of its appearance, but because of what it represents: the complete transgression of natural and spiritual laws. It's a living reminder that knowledge can be dangerous in the wrong hands, and that not all power should be sought. What started as an attempt to protect a ranch became a lesson about invisible boundaries, those that divide the world of the living and spirits, of nature and darkness. Thomas, a simple ranch hand, crossed that boundary by accident, and he paid the price. His story lives on because there's something in it that touches an ancient fear, the fear of what lurks in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true form. Perhaps the scariest thing is realizing that these stories aren't isolated. They connect like points on an invisible map: abandoned ranches, silent forests, soldiers on watch. And although each case has its peculiarities, they all share the same whisper in the air. Be careful what you see in the dark, because sometimes what looks like an animal is something much older and much smarter. And when you shoot, as Thomas did, you might just be starting a conversation with the unknown, a conversation that never ends. The connection between military bases and indigenous lands in the United States is old, and for some, spiritually dangerous. Many outposts were built on lands where, according to native traditions, one should never dig, sleep, or even step after sunset. Soldiers who served in these places report strange, almost always nighttime encounters that defy rational explanations. These aren't isolated hallucinations or rumors from scared recruits, but recurring reports from different eras, bases, and military branches. And in many of these cases, the common element is always the same: humanoid figures, impossible transformations, or voices that belong to no one visible. It's as if something ancient and invisible is responding to the military presence with a subtle yet terrifying force. Unexplained encounters on base. At a base in rural Arizona, 2 patrolling soldiers saw an old man walking near the fence, seemingly disoriented. When they tried to approach him, he simply vanished before their eyes, reappearing on the other side of a 10-foot fence, something physically impossible without climbing or tools. The most unsettling part, however, was when the man reappeared in the form of a rabbit, which watched them for a few seconds before disappearing into the brush again. Both soldiers requested transfers days later. Their superiors claimed fatigue and stress, but those who knew them said they were never the same. One reportedly developed chronic insomnia, swearing that the thing still watches me from afar. Another case happened at Camp Pendleton, California, during a routine night patrol. A group of Marines spotted a creature that looked from a distance like a deer standing on 2 legs. Initially, they thought it was a prank by a recruit, until the being let out a guttural, completely non-human sound. The most experienced member of the group said it wasn't an animal sound, nor a machine, nor a man. When the creature moved, it did so with unnatural speed, running in a straight line up a steep hill without losing balance. None of the soldiers wanted to formally report the incident. They knew what they had seen, but they also knew no one would believe them. After all, who would accept that a bipedal creature with white eyes was prowling a military installation? During the wildfires that devastated California in 2021, especially the Dixie Fire, a military response team was sent to help with evacuations. At night, while camping near an isolated area of the forest, they heard a woman screaming. At first, they thought it was someone lost, but as they got closer, they realized the voice wasn't coming from a fixed location. It moved around them as if watching, and at one point it began repeating phrases the soldiers themselves had said moments before. "That's not an echo," one of them said. "It's an imitation." When they decided to retreat, the voice abruptly stopped. But one of the soldiers said that for a brief second, he saw a coyote-like figure standing upright, watching them from among the trees. The enduring pattern and unspoken fear. These accounts might seem disconnected, but they're not. There's a thin line connecting them. All occurred in places near indigenous territories, or in regions considered spiritually charged by local tribes. Some scholars suggest that building military installations on these sacred lands might have awakened ancient forces, or at least intensified paranormal activity. Others believe these encounters are manifestations of entities that react to the presence of external forces with silent hostility. Either way, the pattern is present, and the more these reports are investigated, the more common they become. Soldiers who face these experiences rarely speak publicly. Many fear ridicule, others are silenced by internal codes of conduct. But among them, in the whispers of hallways and discreet off-duty conversations, these stories circulate as warnings. Don't follow voices in the dark. If you see something that looks like an animal but moves like a person, don't stare. These phrases, passed off as jokes, hide a true fear. It's as if in certain regions the military uniform offers no protection against what resides there, entities that don't respect human hierarchies or get scared by weapons. And the most terrifying part, many of these cases are told with impressive consistency by people who never met each other. Different eras, different wars, different bases. But the elements repeat. Transformations, voices that mimic, eyes that don't blink, and creatures that shouldn't exist. Some say all this is just modern folklore, adapted to wartime. But for those who saw it up close, they aren't just stories, they're warnings. Something exists between the physical and spiritual worlds, and perhaps on some silent nights, that something decides to remind armed men that not everything can be conquered by force. It was a regular early morning at Quantico Base, Virginia, when Corporal Erickson, a military police officer on duty, got a call about unusual activity near the northern perimeter. Camera surveillance was temporarily down for maintenance, so he had to check it out himself. It was winter and a thick fog covered the training field. As he walked among the pine trees, he noticed movement in the distance. At first glance, he thought it was an injured deer. The animal was repeatedly hitting its head against a tree, violently, rhythmically, almost ritually. But as he got closer, he realized something was deeply wrong. The encounter at Quantico. The deer stopped moving. It stood still, as if it knew it was being watched. Then, with a dry crack, it lifted its head. Its forehead was covered in blood, and its eyes seemed glassy but aware. And it was at that moment that Corporal Erickson heard, with absolute clarity, a phrase that froze his blood.
"I know you there."
The voice wasn't human, but it wasn't completely animal either. It was something in between, like a distorted echo trying to form words with a throat not made for it. The soldier took 2 steps back, without taking his eyes off the animal. But what he saw next made him run without looking back. The deer, or whatever it was, slowly rose onto its hind legs. There was no balance, no need for it. It was as if its form obeyed different rules of gravity. Erickson ran to the command post in complete panic. His hands were shaking and he could barely speak. Other officers didn't take his report seriously until he showed them what he had found at the scene. The next morning, they returned to the spot of the encounter and found the tree stained with blood, with bone fragments embedded in the bark. But there were no animal tracks, no signs of intrusion. Just an uncomfortable silence and a chill that seemed to come from the earth itself. The aftermath and wider implications. In the following days, Erickson was temporarily relieved of his duties, with psychological exhaustion cited as the reason. But among colleagues, the story spread quickly. Some started avoiding night patrols in that area. Others swore they had seen shapes moving among the trees, even without an official report. The place unofficially earned the nickname Dead Sector. The incident was recorded in a brief, generic report, with no mention of the deer or the voice. But those who were there that night know what happened at Quantico wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an encounter with something that shouldn't have been there. Curiously, similar stories circulate at other military bases across the United States. Creatures that move like animals but observe like humans. Voices that call soldiers by name, even when they're alone. Glowing eyes that appear where there's no light. And the most disturbing thing, The behavior of these entities seems intentional, almost as if they are testing the limits of human fear. In Erickson's case, the message was clear. It knew he was there, and it wanted to be seen. Some scholars of indigenous folklore believe that entities like skinwalkers or wendigos can manifest where there's been a break in spiritual balance, like on bases built on sacred lands. Quantico, though not in Navajo territory, has records of ancient indigenous occupation. Could it be possible that the place held dormant spiritual memories, awakened by the constant military presence? For the most skeptical, it's just superstition. But for those who've experienced it, there's no doubt that something there watches and reacts. Today, Corporal Erickson works away from the front lines in administrative roles. He never patrols at night anymore. When asked about what he saw, he simply replies, "It wasn't a deer, it was something pretending to be one." And then he remains silent, as if fearing that even speaking more could bring it back. His story is just one among many, but it serves as a grim reminder. In some places, the enemy doesn't wear a uniform. It hides behind empty eyes, broken bones, and voices that whisper in the dark. These stories paint a compelling picture of a world where the physical and spiritual are deeply intertwined. When military bases are built on ancient indigenous lands, it seems more than just cultural traditions are being disturbed. There might be profound invisible consequences at play. In an age of rapid technological advancement, it's striking that so many accounts involve phenomena that completely defy scientific logic. Are these echoes of an unresolved past, or signs of forces we simply don't yet understand? More than just folklore. What if these phenomena are more than just folklore? The repetition of patterns, the increase in reports, and the presence of common elements strongly suggest something real and recurring. Perhaps we are dealing with a form of ancestral consciousness that silently resists, observing and waiting. This something cannot be fought with weapons. It can only be understood through respect. How far is science willing to go to investigate this without sacrificing its credibility? The military's silence. Do the military branches themselves know more than they reveal? Given so many consistent accounts, it would be naive to believe these experiences aren't analyzed in confidential reports. Institutional silence might actually be a form of protection for the soldiers or for the public. Perhaps admitting that the inexplicable haunts highly secure facilities is more dangerous than covering it up. After all, collective fear is a difficult weapon to control. Lessons from indigenous wisdom. These stories also force us to reflect on how we treat the cultures that came before us. Indigenous wisdom, often ignored or dismissed, seems to carry warnings that now make more sense than ever. Respect for the invisible, the land and its secrets might be the key to avoiding these spiritual confrontations. Each new report reminds us what we call superstition, others call survival. Perhaps it's time we listen more carefully. Ultimately, the most unsettling question remains: are we ready to accept that there's something out there, and right here, that escapes our comprehension? Or will we continue to ignore the signs, laugh at the warnings, and push on to lands that demand silence from us? When the veil lifts, we are not always prepared for what lies on the other side, but the stories keep emerging from soldiers, elders, and ordinary witnesses alike.